and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community, and the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and with me today, our special guest is none other than Blaine Packer, IG to be exact. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a Monday morning. It's a public holiday. I got the whole day ahead of me. Doing pretty well.
All right. So I got coffee, you got coffee, and we're ready to go, brother.
Absolutely.
All right. So most people will know you by your YouTube name, IG, or Infinitely Galactic, which you have over 56,000 subscribers. You've created 322 videos, if I counted that right. But that is that persona. That is IG. Who is Blaine Packer personally?
Yeah. Oh, look. I was sort of going back through some of your videos, and I love hearing the responses to this question, especially. But yeah. So me personally, I'm a family man. I've got a beautiful wife, two young little children. And I am, oh golly, I do all kinds of things, but a lot of it centers around communication and dealing with people. So yeah, so I come from a background of interacting with people a lot in my day jobs, which this year and for the last few years actually has been a working with young people as a youth pastor and then as a high school teacher as well. So I've kind of been split those two things. And then, then obviously I've been doing YouTube for a little while as well. So yeah, I love a good coffee. I love a good chat. I do say that I like keeping fit as much as time allows me to. And I used to enjoy a bit of gaming. Definitely don't have time for that now, even though I like the idea of it. I just never get to it. So yeah, that's kind of my life at the moment. Definitely love time with my family, and yeah, that's probably about it for me personally.
That's awesome. You said you are a teacher and a youth pastor. So what grades teaching wise do you do?
Secondary, so grade 7 to kind of grade 11-ish. I don't usually go much higher than grade 11, but yeah, this year I've been working a lot with grade 10s. So yeah, it's a really I don't know. I've been working with teenagers for such a long time now that it feels very natural to me. But whenever people approach me about what I do and they hear that I work with teenagers a lot, they're like, "Oh, you are a crazy person. Why would you do that?" and I don't know. I enjoy it, and I really enjoy the potential that so many young people hold, and being able to call that potential out in them is a lot of fun.
Yep. It's got to be a very rewarding job at times.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So do you have any other hobbies outside of Linux besides all of trying to find free time?
Yeah. Definitely the pursuit of free time is a hobby in and of itself. No, I like reading. So I do a bit of reading. Most of the time it's like nonfiction stuff. So I enjoy a lot of like Cal Newport's stuff. But yeah, I enjoy reading, and I do enjoy watching movies. That was something that I definitely got into probably more when I had more time. It feels like it's been a while since I watched like a lot of movies, but no, like I think it comes back to like, you know, I love communication and I love media in all its forms. So I definitely have to say YouTube, like, and consuming YouTube is definitely a hobby. Because that's probably my primary form of like entertainment. If I'm just kicking back and I've got 15, 20 minutes to burn, it'll be on YouTube.
Right. So what is it like in your local area with your friends, the people you know, you come in contact with? Are they receptive to Linux, or do they look at you like you're crazy sometimes?
Yeah. Most of the time, it's a situation of they have no idea what I'm talking about. And then most of the sort of power users or people that are quite technologically proficient, most of the time they have very preconceived ideas about what Linux is and what it's good for. So, but having said that, I'd say the group that seems to benefit the most from at least my knowledge of Linux and limited as it is the technically not that proficient group. So, for example, people that have friends of ours who live a couple of hours away that we were just visiting the other week, they had like a really old 2009 white plastic MacBook. And this machine is so old. It's got like a Core 2 Duo processor and 2 gig of RAM and that kind of thing. And obviously Apple abandoned support for this laptop a long time ago. And and so when they were sort of just telling me that some of the issues that they were having with it, I was like, hey, look, let's give this other thing a try, because they were just wanting to use the laptop for their kids primarily, who like primary school age. They just need something to surf the web, do Word documents, and put photos on basically. And so I was like, well, let's load this. I think it was Ubuntu Mate. Let's load this up and just see how it goes. And they were like blown away, like in terms of that they could have like up-to-date software. Because I mean, by comparison, by this stage in the game, the OS, the Mac OS or OS 10 that was on that white MacBook was so old that Safari was out of date. half of the web wouldn't even let you go on it because your browser isn't supported anymore.
Right.
So they were just having issues on issues, and to be able to like update that with a long-term support release of something like Ubuntu Mate was it worked really well for them. And so yeah, that's probably the crowd that that are most receptive to it. Just really pragmatic people. They just want to browse the web and dump their photos from their phone and emails and that kind of thing. And and desktop Linux works really well for that crowd.
Well, I think there are a lot of use cases out there in that specific area where people are just wanting to browse the web and do minor things that is a high potential for Linux to grab. I think there's I think it's underrated in that specific area.
Absolutely. And I think also just the at least some of the people that I'm around, they very much get over the very aggressive upgrade cycle that's kind of pushed in tech in general. So, for those who are all stuck on the computers that are running Windows 7, and they're like, I don't see why I should have to go out and buy a new computer. This one, it should still technically be working fine, but I know it's going to bog down to a crawl if I try and put Windows 10 on it, and I'm not crazy about Windows 10 anyway. And it's like, well, there's a prime market there, and so it's great to see some projects really going after that market.
Yep. So before we get too deep into Linux, let's go back to the beginning for you in computers. What was the first computer you used?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm trying to remember. I don't know the name of whatever this model was, but it would have been like an old IBM Tower. It would have been, I think, Windows 3.1. That was my first sort of use of a computer in would have been the mid 90s, I reckon. And so that was, I don't really remember doing a whole lot with it apart from just poking around, because I'm pretty sure it was my dad's computer. And also a friend of mine had a computer as well that he would used to play this, play a variety of MS-DOS based games. So Windows 3.1 was probably my introduction. But then I think it probably wasn't until Windows 95 that I actually started using the computer a lot. And again, mostly around DOS-based games. I had one in particular which came on, I think, a set, or actually my dad had it, and then I ended up finding it later in life just by chance at like a secondhand shop. But it was an MS-DOS Grand Prix game, and it came on like 6 different floppy disks, not the big floppy disks, but like the little ones. And the game was, I think, around 6 megabyte. And back then, that was a big game.
Right.
And so that was a lot of fun. I think although that game itself was already pretty old when I got to it, I think it was like released in the late '80s. And but anyway, it was a lot of fun. I used to play that game an awful lot, and then also like a weird sort of Legend of Zelda clone. I used to play as well. So yeah, mostly around games, and then as life gets more serious when you're going through school and having to do stuff, then computers
Right.
became a bit more serious.
So take us through that progression. You to use that first computer. When is it that you hear about Linux?
Yeah, honestly, not for a long time. Like the first time I started looking into Linux was around. It was around high school. I would have been probably grade 8, grade 9, and the main driver behind it was that I was looking for software to do video editing. I knew like I was really enjoying playing around with this digital camera that I had, and I enjoyed making stuff, just goofy videos with friends and family and that kind of thing. And I needed something that was a little bit more potent or a little bit more capable than like Windows Movie Maker, right? And my granddad, he had a really flash, like he'd just come back from the States, and he had the really flash, or at least it was really impressive to me, white iMac, like one of the first like flat screen all-in-one white iMacs from like 2001, I'm going to say, somewhere around there. And that had iMovie on it, and I was blown away by what that program could do. I was really impressed. So basically, what started as me looking for a video editor in sort of grade 8, grade 9 led to me getting a copy of OS 10 Leopard when that came out. And I'm going to say that probably came out 2007. I'm not sure, somewhere around there. And I tried my butt off to try and install OS 10 on my first personal like Dell tower that I bought with my own money after working at a job for about a year and a half. And it limited success, but man, I fell down a rabbit hole really, really deep. And just learning so much about how operating systems interact with the hardware. And I was just like, it was an all-consuming passion for me for a little while, just trying to get Mac OS 10 running on this Dell tower. And so I'm like playing with drivers, I'm editing text files, the whole works. And I finally kind of get it up and running, but it's so fragile and it breaks so easily. I'm like, this isn't worth it. I can't even like, there's no way, there's no point me trying to play with this anymore. But through that process, I ended up stumbling across an article about another video editor, which is Kdenlive. And also I think at that point, no, I don't think Bit was around. Cinderella. Cinderella was the other video editor. And both of these video editors at that point in time were only able to run on Linux. So I would go to their webpage and I'd see all the features that these video editors had, and the fact that they were free, because I couldn't afford Sony Vegas or Premiere or whatever was going at the time. And I was like, this is perfect. This is the video editor that I need. But what is this Linux thing? So after a lot of learning and failed attempts with running OS 10, I picked up a Linux magazine, and on it, I can't remember which one was the first one. I think it was probably Ubuntu 8.04. I think that was probably the first one that I ever like tried. And I just popped the CD out off the front of the magazine, put it in, booted it up, and like almost everything like worked just from the live CD. And already my mind was just being blown about the fact that you could run an operating system just off a CD. And I was like, wow, what is this? So I kind of had to park it there for a little bit because school and work was just getting hectic. But I ended up looping back around by the time, I think, it was probably late 2009, and started having a bit more free time again, and found this whole world of Linux distros and different spins. And at the time, I didn't have a great internet connection. So for me, the out of the box experience was like the most important thing, because at my house we didn't have great internet for whatever reason. It's not like we couldn't get it; it's just that we didn't have it.
Right.
So the ability to find something, like if I wanted to go and get a new Linux distro, I had to go down to the library, download that ISO, burn it to a DVD right there on the library computer, then take that home and hope that it worked. So I went through that kind of trial and error process a few times. OpenSUSE 11.2, I think I tried using that for quite a while and loved that distribution a lot. But the one that ended up capturing my attention and sort of being the first distribution that I ever installed on my own computer, which at this point was a laptop, a big 17-inch clunker, was Linux Mint 8. And I think that was based on Ubuntu 9.10. Yeah. And so I popped it on there and got my video editor up and running. And I was like, this is it. I've made it. That was so easy breezy compared to the nightmare of trying to get Mac OS 10 running on my hardware. So, and then from there, there's just plenty of tinkering and lessons learned. And yeah.
Well, do you remember the experience with that first install with Linux Mint? I know it's great, but tell us some of the good, maybe some of the bad things you found.
Oh, look, for me, it was all just a learning curve of trying to figure out how it worked. So, for example, back then, I think Linux Mint had a very rudimentary software manager, and then they also had the package manager, like the Synaptic package manager. And I was still trying to get my head around how that process worked, because of course, my background was only ever, you wanted to get a piece of software, you would download the .exe file, or you download the .app for, the Mac, and then you'd put it on a USB stick and stick it into your computer and install it. That was all I knew. And so the whole idea of package management, it took a little while for it to click on how it worked. I was like seeing all these entries for all these different software in the repository, like in the Synaptic package manager. And I'm thinking to myself, is all this software just chilling there, or how does that work? Like, and I'm trying to install it and it's giving me errors. And I'm like, oh, wait, I've got to be connected to the internet in order for this to work. I get it. So at that point, I guess, the limitations of not having a whole lot of internet meant that I actually had to go out and either tether off my phone, which I had barely any data, or like I said, get to the library or find some, Wi-Fi or something. And I think also Wi-Fi drivers were an issue back in those days, especially around Broadcom and that kind of thing. It was one of those catch-22s where if you didn't have a Wi-Fi driver, you couldn't get on the internet. So you weren't able to go get that driver, and round and round you go. So there was a lot of back and forth with USB sticks, digging through repositories, finding those .deb files, and whatever else I needed to try and get the hardware up and running. But yeah, long story short, I did end up succeeding and really loving Linux Mint 8. That was I was dual booting with Windows 7 at the time. And I was just proud of the fact that I'd landed it on the hardware. I could choose to boot into it, and it was running way faster. And I hadn't completely screwed up my Windows 7 side of things either, so I could keep playing my games and doing that.
Right.
So so it was a fun time, but definitely all of the lessons that I'd learned from playing around with Mac OS 10 and operating systems and in general definitely helped as I was slowly figuring out this Linux thing.
Right. Well, Broadcom has been the cause of many headaches over the years, and only recently has it just been to the point where now they just work. So let's go back to you got dual boots, you got Windows 7, you got Linux Mint. Is there a time where you go all Linux, or do you continue to dual boot?
Yeah, for the most part, I would say that I continue to hold on to a Windows install somewhere throughout the years. I think it probably wasn't until I'm going to say maybe 2010, 2011, is when I started using Linux as like the daily driver, as like the thing that I was using every day. Up until that point, it was what I would boot up when I wanted to do a media project. So if I, if I had image files that I was working on in GIMP, or a video project in Kdenlive, or that kind of thing, that I would boot up Linux Mint. But the rest of the time, I'd be using Windows. And so yeah, it probably wasn't until it was 2010, 2011 that I finally made the switch almost entirely to running Linux as the daily driver. And then I still kept a Windows install around for gaming with my friends and that kind of thing.
So do you still use Windows and Mac?
So today, like as of probably the last year or so, I don't have any. I personally don't have any Windows or Mac devices. I have two laptops. One that's kind of just not doing anything right now; it's just kind of chilling, and one that I do everything on. And both of those just have Linux on them. There's no Windows. I do have Windows like in a virtual machine that I'll spin up every now and again if I need like a Windows specific app, but I just found myself booting into Windows less and less in the last year, especially, and by that stage, even though I'd had Mac for a while, I'd gotten rid of that. Having said that, though, like for different different jobs that I've been in and that kind of thing, like the last teaching job that I was in, they ran a complete Apple shop there, so I got given like a MacBook Air to interface with everything that they had going on at the school. But yeah, so in terms of like me personally and what I do now is pretty much full Linux.
All right. Well, going by your YouTube channel, everybody knows that you have tried out pretty much every distro out there. Do you consider yourself a distro hopper still?
Oof. Yes, probably. The first part is admitting it, right?
Yep. That's the first step.
Oh dear. No, it's always the problem when you have so much choice and there is so much flexibility, is that you always have this probably a lie that's like there might be something better out there. There might be something that just works that little bit better. Maybe it suits your workflow a bit better. So yeah, having said that though, I think I have settled down a little bit over probably the last year, especially since I've been like living with these distros and full time just being in Linux. I think I've sort of calmed down with the amount of like rinsing and repeating that I do, just because it takes time and time is valuable these days. So yeah, so I think the staple ones that I've kind of circled back around to would be I definitely have spent a lot of time with Fedora over the last 18 months, and then that's kind of changed up with Debian based ones intermittently. So whether that's Elementary OS or Pop OS, or at the moment Ubuntu Mate, yeah, usually those are kind of the ones that I'll flip flop between. Yeah, so those are probably my go-tos.
So what are the reasons why you choose something like Ubuntu Mate to run?
Yeah, a lot of it, and chatting with Martin the other day, it was really interesting exploring some of this. But a lot of it comes down to nostalgia for me. Honestly, it's there are features that are in Ubuntu Mate that you can get in other distros, but there are features in there that I just appreciate the attention to detail, and also it just harkens back to a time where I just really enjoyed what was going on in desktop Linux. And I'll probably circle back around to this comment a little bit later in our conversation, but things like consistent app indicators, things like the heads-up display menu was just, as soon as that launched in Ubuntu Unity, I was sold. Like, to me, that was a game changer because of, the elaborate menus that were in GIMP and Kdenlive and a lot of the apps that I used. Being able to just hit the Alt key and start typing whatever the command was that I needed was so much quicker than hunting through menus. So being able to have that out of the box really simply, and And besides that, I think Ubuntu Mate is just it's just really fast. Like it feels really snappy to me, and I don't lack any functionality that usually comes with a lighter or faster desktop environment. Having said that, though, like on modern hardware now, it kind of feels like everything's pretty snappy. So
Yeah.
that's probably not even too much of a complaint against the others, because GNOME feels pretty snappy these days. KDE is ridiculous.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think it is mostly nostalgia for me at the moment. That's what I'm kind of riding on. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, let's dive into your YouTube channel a little bit. So you started back in 2010, I believe. What makes you go from just a regular Linux user to saying, hey, I want to start a YouTube channel and put videos up there?
That is the question, isn't it? I'm still wondering. No. No, a lot of, like, so much of it came down to, I felt like I had learned a lot in the process of like trying to find video editor, trying to find different software that was going to work for just pragmatically what I wanted to do, with my hobby time. That that in the process of trying out all of these different, Linux distros and tinkering around with them, I started to get a bit of a sense of like what was the priorities, or what was the sort of target crowd for these different Linux distros. And absolutely, I was 18 years old when I started that and uploaded that first video. So, I was pretty green in terms of everything IT related, still am in a lot of ways. But the impetus behind uploading that original video was the fact that I had played around with OpenSUSE 11.2 on a DVD that came on the front of a magazine way back when that first came out, and I really, really loved how professional that Linux distro felt compared to Ubuntu at the time, which had its kind of muddy brown thing going on, and Linux Mint, which still had the reputation anyway of being a sort of a noob friendly, kind of fresh and maybe not the most mature distro at this point. OpenSUSE just felt like something that you could show up at a board meeting and have running on machines and nobody would bat an eye. Like they'd be like, yep, that looks like professional kind of software that you should be running if you're, in this company. And at the time, OpenSUSE, I think, was kind of directed, or SUSE Linux was owned by Novell. And so you could just kind of tell the attention to detail that went into that distribution. So basically, when OpenSUSE 11.3 came out, I was like, this project or this distro, I feel like will suit someone's needs out there somewhere. And maybe even if it doesn't suit my needs, I feel like I've learned a fair bit about how this thing works. And it's just so good that I can't just keep this to myself. And I wanted to make, hopefully, the process easier of finding an alternative to those that might be looking. So the idea was, well, I can just install these different distributions, make some videos about it, share my thoughts about what I think each distribution does well and who I think it might suit. And then if people are kind of looking through, going down this Linux rabbit hole that I went down and are looking for the right option, maybe they won't need to try them all out, and they can just kind of watch my thoughts and experiences on it and kind of get a feel for different Linux distros. And that argument was flawed, because we all know that we're all going to try all the things anyway because we can. But yeah, that's kind of where it started, and yeah, it was just a nice kind of extension of everything that I was learning about Linux at the time.
Well, I think it may be flawed, you say, but I think it is valid because, thinking back to when I started in Linux, I watched YouTube videos trying to find out what would be good as an operating system, what would be good as a distro. I did try them all, but I still watched them to see, so I don't think it's so flawed. And OpenSUSE was always had that professional feel about it. No matter where you tried it, it did always have that professional feel, and I think it still does today. So now,
definitely,
did you realize back then when you made that 11.3 video that you would be at a point where you have 56,000 subscribers and hundreds of videos?
No, probably not. I mean, I don't know. I never saw it being a thing that I would prioritize time for throughout life. For me, it was something that I just had the time to do it, and I had the passion and the enthusiasm to kind of share what I was learning. And so I was like, I'll just put it out there, and we'll just see what happens. And I think I was definitely inspired by YouTubers at the time, and obviously YouTube was a very different space in sort of the late 2000s and the early 2010s compared to what it is now. But yeah, there was definitely that. There was just a fascinating sense of like online community and discussion that was starting to come up out of these YouTubers and what they did. And so I don't think I had grand ambitions for the channel or anything. I wasn't trying to make it as a full-time YouTuber or anything like that, because I didn't even think that was an option back then. But yeah, it was definitely something where I was just inspired by some of the other content creators of the time that weren't tech or Linux related at all. And I was like, I'll just give this a whirl, and we'll see what fun we can have with it along the way.
Well, I think we're all glad that you did try that.
Yeah.
Well, you made that first video, then you fast forward a year and you make another OpenSUSE, I think it's 12.1 video. And I always like looking at the progression of YouTube channels and what the quality was like when it started compared to what it is now. And even within a year, there was an amazing transformation in the quality of the video you put out for 12.1 than it was 11.3. Obviously, you're first starting out with making videos, so that's going to be normal. But was that a goal of yours to continue the channel and make the quality better and better?
I think, and this becomes like a real fundamental, almost philosophical question when it comes to YouTubers and content creators in general, is that for me, I've been making videos for, about a year by that point. And within, I think, the first 9 months of me doing uploading videos, there was a couple of videos in a row that performed a lot better than every other video that I'd ever done. And at that point, that was when I had my first offer from Google to monetize videos. And I was like, whoa, you can what? Like, I can make money doing this? Like, this is amazing. So, for a broke college student, that sounded amazing. And so it became sort of like I started to approach it like a bit of like, yes, a hobby, but also a bit of a part-time job, that I was like, well, if I'm going to continue to grow this, and if it's something that I want to see, growth in every aspect, so growth in my own capability as somebody that can make these things, growth in my knowledge of Linux and the open source world, and growth financially, then I'm going to have to show up and put time in. So, for me and my schedule at that point, that kind of worked out pretty well. And I'll never forget getting that first check from Google. I think it was like, I'm going to say it was probably like $250 or something like that. And I was just blown away. I was like, wow, I could go out and I could like get a better mic, or I could, maybe if I save up for a couple months, I could get like a whole better laptop. Like, this is unreal. And so over the following like years, basically, like whatever ad revenue I got, basically just went straight into like getting better gear. And like down the track, as I was making more video projects for YouTube, I was also making video projects, in and around the place, for, local like organizations and for me personally, and that kind of thing. So, as time went on, my YouTube channel and the hobby started funding like, a DSLR and a few lenses and some, mics and, all this other video gear that I just would never have been able to afford, on my own. And so it just kind of seemed fitting that as I was acquiring, this gear, that basically I was just turning all the ad revenue back into getting better gear for the channel. That yeah, by the time we got to by the time we got to probably 2012, 2013, production quality, at least in my head anyway, was like, going up a few notches. And it was a good time.
Well, were there any obstacles that you encountered then? Or maybe I should ask you, what advice would you give to somebody looking to follow that same path of becoming a content creator?
Oh man. One of the key things that I remember hearing early on in my journey was that if you wanted to have a proper go at it, you would have to be willing to just do what you could with the gear that you had, and show up consistently, because the only way you can build an audience is to be consistent. And so for me, in those early years, especially while I was in college, I had the time to be consistent with uploading a video a week. I think that's roughly what it worked out as. And so that consistency, I think, is probably what leads to growth. Having said that, nowadays YouTube is such a competitive space compared to what it was back in 2010. It's such a huge platform now. And so back then I had no idea about how much work to put into or how much work should, in theory, go into your thumbnail and the title of the video, because algorithms and clickbait and all of those things. So, there's a whole world of that up and coming content creators have to be able to do that basically out of the gate. They've got to be able to, spend good quality time coming up with a good thumbnail and a good title for their video, as well as just getting content out there as best as they possibly can with the gear that they have. But yeah, probably consistency is just the number one thing. If you've got to give a solid crack at it and realize that you could be doing it for a long time as a hobby and get no financial incentive whatsoever from it. It's been amazing watching content creators. Some of the guys that I've just been blown away by how quickly they've been able to establish an audience online presence, like Chris Titus Tech and Nick from My Linux Experiment. And, those guys, they've been on the YouTube scene in a serious way, for 18 months, maybe 2 years tops. And, they're killing it. They're doing such a great job. And it's, it's consistency and they know what's up and they're just doing a great job.
Exactly. And I think that's the two things that you hit right there was Chris Titus. When I talked to him, it was consistency. He was determined he was going to put out a video every day. And with Nick, with the Linux Experiment, the quality is amazing. So I think those are very important things. So out of all of your videos that you created, do you have a favorite one, or maybe one that you're most proud of?
Yes. And I was having a conversation about this with somebody a few weeks ago. So when I saw this question pop up, I was like, yes, I know, absolutely. So for me, it was my Ubuntu 14.04 review. For me, I put it sounds bad because it sounds like I'm over the hill and going down the other end, but I put so much time, effort, and attention into that particular video because I just thought that Ubuntu was at this climax of something that was unique and something that was polished, something that performed well, and something that that had a uniquely different spin on computing that actually made so much sense in my head. And so that's why I was and at that point in time, and I still do for that matter, I was loving the cinematography and videography of sites like The Verge in their video reviews that they were doing back in, I think I started watching them probably in about 2012, 2013, and was loving the way that they produced reviews. They were really tight, scripted, really nice B-roll, all this kind of thing. And so I was like, man, if I love this distribution. I ran Ubuntu 14.04 for probably 2 years on the same hardware. I loved it. I was there for a long time. And so when it came out and I was playing around with it, I was just blown away. I'm like, this distro is so good. I'm just going to spend way more time and effort than I normally would. on a video. So I, hammered out a few thousand words worth of a script and refined that for a few days, and then came up with shot lists and went out and shot a bunch of B-roll and and sort of really tried to get a very smooth kind of polished video aesthetic going on. And then spent way too long editing it. And thankfully though, thankfully it was one of those times where I feel like that actually paid off, because it did get like a lot of views, and it just felt very rewarding, I guess, to see something that I was so happy with, Ubuntu, that particular release, and pour so much time and love and attention into a video project, and to see it do well was really rewarding. So yeah, that's probably, in my head, that's the one that I had the most fun making, and that also seemed to balance out in terms of how it went. So overall, it was just a good experience, good memory.
Yeah. Yep. Well, there's always them couple videos that you make that are like, they stand out and you remember making them and you remember everything about them while you're making them. Some of them, you go along and you make them, but there's just one or two that always stand out. And yeah, that's awesome. All right. Being in the public eye, especially on YouTube, there's no shortage of like feedback. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's sometimes ugly. There are some great people who give you good feedback. There are people that give you constructive criticism, which is awesome to have. And a lot of people give you feedback with the goal to make it better. They're not just trying to, throw a bad comment at you. But how do you deal with trolls or people who just, blast your video for no apparent reason?
It's honestly, and I can honestly say it. There's been very little vitriol that I've had to deal with on my channel, and just throughout, almost 10 years of doing it, I've been really, really amazed by and large, like the quality and the caliber of like interaction and support, whether it is constructive criticism or not. Most of the time, I'd probably be pretty confident in saying 95% of the time, at least that's what it feels like to me, the people that are hanging out in the comments seem to be perfectly decent. Occasionally, flame wars will start up about one thing or the other, but it's very rare that I've had comments that have personally attacked or tried to troll me as a content creator. Having said that, I do remember there was a season where, and it was probably about 9 months or so, where consistently every video that I would upload, within probably the first 2 or 3 hours of that video being up, there would be 10 dislikes, just every time, magically around sort of 2-3 hours after the video had been uploaded, 10 dislikes. And sometimes to the point where, I'd have a video that would have 3 likes and 10 dislikes because it had just been so early. And I just never understood what was going on with that. Never addressed it, never went digging. I was just like, that is weird. And then eventually it just dried up. It just stopped. I'm just trying to think. I don't think there's been times where I felt, personally attacked or trolled, or somebody's just trying to give me a hard time for the sake of it. But definitely the constructive criticism thing is you'll definitely get people that, I'd say the probably more consistent thing in the Linux world anyway is people correcting you on things that you got factually wrong with, how Linux works and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And I'm always up for that, because honestly, I know a little bit, but I don't know. I don't contribute to the Linux kernel or anything like that. I don't profess to know an awful lot, but I think it does put you in a weird juxtaposition when you're a content creator for a particular topic. People expect you to kind of know everything that there is to know about this thing. So I do feel like sometimes maybe people enjoy pointing out where I've gotten things wrong. But by and large, most people are pretty fair about it. And if I do see something that they've pointed out that's a fair point that I completely got wrong, then I'll be like, hey, appreciate that. My bad,
I can relate to the whole thumbs down I think there are some of the live streams within seconds of the live stream going live. There's thumbs down on, like, there's one thumbs down on the stream. It's like, come on, dude. But yeah, I think that on a whole, the feedback is very constructive, and there are people who maybe are a little bit hard in the way they say it, but they're all meaning to get you to a better point. And a lot of it is learning how to Linux, how to do the commands. Maybe I'm doing something specifically this way, and there's a better way to do it, or maybe I don't quite understand the command I'm doing. So yeah, it's definitely a good experience overall. But looking through your channel, dude, you would be hard pressed to find a distribution that you haven't reviewed and haven't covered in some way. But is there a specific distro right now that intrigues you in the direction that they're going with what they're doing with innovation or anything? Is there something that you say, man, that's awesome?
This is such a wonderful question that I could spend hours talking about. But I think the distributions that I am sort of most excited for the progress of them would be Elementary OS and Pop OS. I think both of them have a compelling vision for what they see the Linux desktop operating as. They both like fully lean into their not their absurdities, but like the unique decisions that they have made that not everyone agrees with, but they fully embrace what they have set out to do, and they just keep chipping away. And when they chip away at stuff, it's quality. And I think it's those quality of life improvements that that the Elementary team consistently make to their release. Like for me personally, at the moment anyway, with the hardware that I've got going on, it takes a bit too much tweaking and a bit too much like fussing around for me to get the 1804 Ubuntu base really working well on my hardware. And so I'm not running it at the moment, but I follow, what they're doing, and they do such a great job of communicating, the changes that they're making and their priorities and that kind of thing. And also just the momentum that project seems to give towards developers for getting just simple, you could call them indie or whatever you want to do, but like simple apps into an app store that developers, it's very streamlined for developers to get a bit of a kickback, and for people to be able to not be forced to, but be encouraged to donate towards the projects that they appreciate. And again, it's not a decision that everyone was on board with in the free and open source software world, but it was definitely something that I see. It's one of those things that kind of has to happen if you want to be able to push Linux desktop apps and the way that the Linux desktop functions. People got to get paid,
right.
And people want to be rewarded for the good work that they do. And so yeah, while controversial at times, and obviously not everyone agrees with how they set up their distribution out of the box, and like how, I don't know, locked down, or how it's not that tweakable out of the box and all that kind of thing. I understand that, but at the same time, I love what they're doing. So it's, I like that. And then Pop OS, they've been just like a fascinating project to watch, because when I first saw Pop OS come out, I was like, what's the point? Ubuntu already uses GNOME now. I don't understand why we need another Ubuntu-based distribution that just runs stock GNOME. What's this?
Right.
But as time has gone on, some of the things that they've done to better support their own hardware, in doing so, it actually benefits like a lot of people. So when NVIDIA was going through that really weird, dodgy time where they were trying to figure out, dual graphics, and Linux was just having a tough time. I feel like we'd figured it out there for a bit with Bumblebee, and
almost.
Yeah, it seemed like you could, at least I had it running pretty well. I could go OptiRun, whatever. and get my NVIDIA driver or NVIDIA card to just kick in whenever I needed it. And then it just kind of went through this weird funk for a few years where nothing seemed very clean. And so to have something like Pop! OS come in and just go, problem solved. You either download the Intel version or the AMD version, or you download the NVIDIA version. Go nuts. And to have that work as well as it did was really refreshing. And then, just the tweaks that they would put in for like power saving and switching your graphics card easily. And now some of the stuff that they're working on with being able to do an offline, like in-place upgrade from one release to the next they're all just like really solid, compelling features that give an operating system like proper credentials, that give it proper staying power in the public's eye. And it shows because, I remember there was a Linus Tech Tips video that popped up about gaming on Linux and how far that had come. Absolutely true. And they recommended Pop! OS as like this is one you should try out because of great hardware support, the drivers that they include are great, all these other reasons. So yeah, I'm really excited to see as time goes on. There also seems to be a bit of longevity in terms of, Pop! OS being backed by System 76. System 76 as a company has a vested interest in making sure that Pop! OS works well, not only on their hardware, but on everybody else's, because there's a little bit of, cross promotion there. Yep. So there's a little bit of security in that in my mind. So when I'm recommending people, especially people that are a little bit tech savvy and can, quickly get their head around how Linux works, Pop! OS is like such a great introduction in my head anyway to Linux, just because of, all those reasons. Fantastic hardware support, longevity.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that, you have Elementary and Pop! OS collaborating together. They're both going for quality in what they're doing. They both took a lot of heat in the beginning, like you said, for the decisions that they made, but they keep going along slow and steady. And every release gets better and better and better to the point where you're like, well, maybe they did make the right decision back then, like with Elementary and the App Store. That was a very controversial decision. And they took a lot of heat for that. But if you've used it lately, some of the apps in there are absolutely amazing. And that's exactly what they were going for. They were shooting for quality apps to be made in the Elementary store. And just a little personal note, I was looking for an ebook reader. And of course, the best and most popular ebook reader is Bookworm, which is an app from the Elementary store. And you pretty much can't have it, except if you're on Elementary. So there you go. But yeah, true. Both of them are quality.
Yeah.
All right. You kind of mentioned it there. You would give Pop! OS, but if you were to give a distro to a new non-technical user, which one do you think it would be?
Yeah. So again, I would probably, as much as I love Pop! OS and Elementary, it would really depend on who that person is. If that person is like a Mac diehard, I probably would give them Elementary, just because they probably appreciate the same, design flourishes here and there, and the attention to detail and quality and that kind of thing would probably work well for them. And if they had come from sort of a very traditional, like old school Windows background, it would probably be a toss up between like Linux Mint and Ubuntu Mate, I reckon, depending on what kind of hardware they were running. Because both of those distributions, they seem to have a good, they've got a good amount of support available for them. So when people go Googling stuff, it's very easy to find solutions to things. But also just out of the box, they can be, they're just really easy to get, for people to get their head around. The other project that I find just fascinating and that I also recommend to people that are wanting to try out Linux for the first time, if they're kind of midway between just a person that's just going to browse the web and maybe somebody who wants to, maybe do a little bit more gaming, they might have a Steam library, and they're looking to delve just that little bit deeper with Linux, then or they're wanting to, explore a bunch of different possibilities with software and that kind of thing. Zorin OS is a project that I've always had a soft spot for, and I think they do a killer job of giving a desktop that is like feels fresh. It's got a great choice of software out of the box, they seem to have their priorities straight when it comes to the target demographic that they're going for. They market themselves really well as well, which is another huge plus. And apart from the support thing, which they have got avenues of support for themselves, but they're not as Googleable in terms of if you had an issue and you were only looking up solutions for Zorin OS, it probably wouldn't be as prolific as if you went for Ubuntu. But again, that's only a matter of letting them know, hey, it's based on Ubuntu. Just search that.
Right.
It'd be a toss-up between Zorin OS, Linux Mint, and Ubuntu Mate, depending on the hardware and the person and that kind of thing.
Yep. Zorin OS is another quality distribution and another distribution that made choices that people didn't like, but, proving them wrong sometimes. So what is your daily workflow like? What software do you rely on the most? Is there like a list of software? Like you say you install you distro hop. What's the software you install that you need to have to run on a daily basis?
Great question. Let me just open up my menu real quick, and I'll let you know. So some of the first things that I'm going to be installing will be trying to get the most up-to-date versions of GIMP. So I usually go down the Flatpak route for that one, because that way it'll keep itself up to date more or less. Steam, I traditionally used to go with Flatpak with that one, but I just found a few too many issues with trying to get things working properly. So I'll try and go like through native kind of package management if I can. And Kdenlive as the video editor that I've been using for a long time now, and I just can't get away from it. I've tried Olive, I've tried Shotcut, I've tried OpenShot, I've tried a bunch, but for whatever reason, Kdenlive is the one I keep coming back to. So I will try and install that. I used to go through Flatpak with that one as well, but I found that occasionally things would get a little bit funky, and sometimes the Flatpak packaging would have issues in interim releases, and sometimes there would be a little bit of a delay with those issues being fixed. In that Kdenlive would publish an updated version, but it'd take a little while for it to get to Flatpak. So for somebody that relies on it, I found the containerized app image that I could just go and download straight from Kdenlive's website worked in my favor. So at the moment, I'm using the app image of Kdenlive for all of that. OBS Studio, go with Flatpak for that again, just for all the same reasons, keeping it up to date, that kind of thing. Lollipop is my music player of choice, and Flatpak again. And what I'm noticing is that the more that I go through and set up machines, the more I'm relying on these universal packaging systems. It was actually something that I was really excited about, and I was talking with Martin about this as well, in regards to snaps and Flatpaks, and when all of those were coming on the scene. And it was something that I was really excited about, the fact that you could have, no matter kind of what distro you were running, you could have these apps at their latest version and updated. And in my head, that meant, oh, wow, instead of being stuck on a long-term support release of Ubuntu and having packages that are older than dirt, being able to go out and get, the latest version of certain programs or certain apps and run them in a way that doesn't break or affect your system in any way just seemed like an amazing thing. I've definitely benefited a lot from that. I think, and while I have definitely used some snaps in the past, I was using MailSpring as an email client for quite a long time there, and they packaged that as a snap. And loved what they were doing. It's such a polished email client for managing multiple email accounts. It's got a lot of great features in it for free. The downside is that it isn't, while the client itself is open source, the engine side of it, or the way that the email interacts with their servers isn't. So it's give or take, but So at the moment, I'm just managing email through a web browser. It is what it is.
Right.
And all kinds of virtual machine management programs. So most of the time, it'll be between VirtualBox and VMware Player, depending on which one I can get better performance out of. And occasionally, I'll try in GNOME boxes as well. And there's a whole nother world there that I need to explore and learn about in terms of more Linux native forms of virtualization. So, I keep hearing and sort of needing to understand a lot more about sort of, I think there's Virtual Manager, there is QEMU. Anyway, so there's a bunch of stuff there that I still don't actually know that I probably should, being in the position that I am. But time being limited, VMware and VirtualBox work pretty well most of the time. And I think that about covers it. Oh, one thing that I have actually started to use an awful lot just to tweak webcam stuff is just GU-VC View, because of the fact this webcam that I'm talking into now, when you plug it in and you first open up something, it has it's got the power frequency kind of banding stuff going on because of the fact that power on one half of the world is at 60 hertz and over here it's 50 hertz, and so screen refresh rates, all that kind of thing. So being able to tweak some of those things in GU-VC View and then open it up in Zoom or in OBS or whatever has been a good little find to get things looking a bit better.
Yep, that's awesome, dude. Awesome list of software. Now, speaking of software, is there any software that's not available on Linux that you'd like to see come to Linux?
As it applies to what I do, like a common one is like, oh, wouldn't it be great if the Adobe suite came and found its home on Linux? Part of me kind of agrees with that, but even if it did, I wouldn't know the first thing about trying to use Adobe stuff because I've had barely any exposure to it because basically all of the production that I've done, Audacity was another one I left out, but basically all of the production that I've done and media projects that I've done throughout the last almost 10 years have been basically, exclusively using these open source apps. I was really excited with DaVinci Resolve, and I'm still keeping my eye on that project in general. I used it as a trial for a couple of videos on my channel, and especially while I still had Mac hardware lying around, and I had a Surface Book for a little while as well. I was using DaVinci Resolve on those for a few projects, and that project is just out of this world in terms of what that video editor is capable of and the features that are getting added to it. But it's already on Linux. Like I could go and get it if I wanted to. Problem is the H.264 importing means that you need to go out and shell out the $300 I think it is for the studio version. Yep. And I'm like, am I going to fully utilize everything that's in DaVinci Resolve to justify that investment? I don't know. I'm not there yet. Kdenlive does what I want it to do for the most part, and I'd have to be getting pretty deep into very complicated edits in order to move away from Kdenlive, because right now it just strikes the best balance of simplicity and features, whereas I jump into DaVinci Resolve and it's like, whoa, you could do so much in this app, and yet I wouldn't know, I wouldn't really know where to start. So it's I don't know. Basically everything that I want to run, and even a lot of the games that I used to play, because I don't really stay up to date too much with games now, but the games that I still enjoy playing from yesteryear, they all run really well now on Steam, and Lutris is doing a great job, and just gaming on Linux in general is just so much less painful than what it was. So there's hence I don't really have a Windows install kicking around anymore.
We are in a great place right now, dude, with Linux. We are taking, it seems like we are improving with greater leaps and greater strides, quicker and quicker with every release that, even a year ago, it was not as easy to install, not as easy to get software, not as easy to get drivers. And right now it's like Plug and play almost, dude.
Yeah.
All right, so Linux is pretty much everywhere. You know, it's in places you expect it to be, like on web servers and stuff like that. It's also in places you don't expect it to be, like in video movie rental machines and Mac machines and everywhere. So, but where does Linux stand at in your mind on the grand scheme of things?
Yeah. We always like to talk about desktop Linux because that's like what is most visible to us. That's what we love to use. It's a one-to-one kind of, there's a person wanting to use a computer and there's a Linux operating system that they can interact with. And to me, that's always been the most interesting part of Linux. But Linux is a force to be reckoned with. Just in general. And I think we're at like a very interesting time in computing where people care less and less about what their hardware is running. Unless you're unless you are a hardcore Apple person and you're happily tootling around in your walled garden, people really couldn't care less what their computer is running, as long as they can open up Chrome and do their thing. So on one hand, you've got the consumers, which on a desktop or a laptop, most of what people were doing on computers 10 years ago, people are now doing on their phones or on an iPad or something like that. So there's already, on the consumer side of things, there's that whole area to look at. And I think when you look at like PC sales and all that kind of thing, there's a bit reflected in that market where PCs aren't selling as much as they used to. And so there's been a lot of effort to kind of make the PC market more premium so that people can, so that people shell out a little bit more when they do buy a computer.
Right.
So more and more companies are relying on Linux for their workflow. And I'm thinking especially of 3D modeling. So game design, I'm thinking of visual effects, film studios. I've seen desktop Linux pop up in, behind the scenes for different, like architectural kind of computer CNC kind of situations, in all kinds of industrial applications. And I think the reason being is just because that you look at where Mac OS and you look at where Windows 10 is headed and the priorities that they have around, most of them are trying to get the same vibrancy of App Store that mobile platforms enjoy. They're trying to push that onto the desktop to make desktop computing more accessible and more fun and more accessible for consumers. But professionals hate that kind of stuff. The advertisements and stuff that's built into Windows 10 is not appreciated by by professionals, and I don't even know if it's appreciated by consumers, to be honest. But and then on the Mac OS side of things, there's where there was a very vibrant professional creative market that Apple had, and I was definitely like one of those who was in that market for a little while. Their priorities now seem to be either like sky high professional, like just super expensive hardware.
Yep.
But in my head, I don't know if their attention to detail and their engineering that's going into Mac OS as a platform is justifying these professionals outlaying that level of cash to get very restricted, very locked down, very not future-proofed kind of hardware. And so that's where, the raw metal of what you can buy now with PC components is crazy good. Like, I mean, we all knew it was going to happen, but the level of power you get in graphics cards and chips and all that kind of thing these days is just getting better and better. But the operating systems that are prolific seem to hold that kind of hardware back. And so that's where I see Linux, I guess, in the future, taking more and more ground in that sort of professional workflow, whether it's a custom application that a particular company creates for Linux for their entire company to use in a professional sense, or whether it's just more companies realizing, hey, maybe we don't have to go out and buy super expensive hardware. We can just repurpose the stuff that we've got with a much more efficient OS that is easy to manage, easy to maintain, and we know what we're dealing with. We can change it and tweak it to how we want. And I think there's just a lot of exciting potential there for I guess the grand development of Linux, and the amount of people that and the amount of companies that feel invested in Linux's progress is, I guess, where that boils down to.
Well, Martin Wimpress recently said on Biddle that he believes that basically that Linux will hit the scene big time once these companies, these bigger companies, decide to, and he believes that they will decide to run Linux like you're talking about, and big, huge companies like Disney and stuff like that. So in that, I guess we don't really have, I think we're pretty bad at marketing, to be honest with you, as far as the Linux desktop is concerned. But I guess his argument is that we don't have to market Linux ourselves. If the bigger companies will adopt Linux, that will take care of the marketing.
Definitely. It's interesting to me that I think that the flow-on effect of bigger companies adopting Linux because of all the properties that Linux has uniquely that Mac OS and Windows just don't. I think the run-on effect of that is that more companies are invested in the Linux ecosystem, which means to larger investment in the companies that are behind Linux, whether it's Red Hat or whether it's Canonical or whoever, Intel, they're all going to feel like they've got to keep pushing this platform forward, as opposed to, stagnating out or just forever chasing the whims of consumers. Because what that will lead to is genuine innovation. And we've already seen it in terms of, a company like Valve makes the decision that, you know what, we don't want to be forever tied to the Windows ecosystem. If Microsoft decided that Windows wasn't a priority anymore, which, by the way, they kind of did, means that they don't want to be stuck in a world where they can only support Windows. And they had Mac support as well, but Mac hardware is a bit hard to get into as a game developer, so I've been told. So what do? They go out and they go, well, let's start exploring the Linux side of things. Just the huge amount of effect that average Linux users have enjoyed because of that decision that Valve made. I can't remember who it was that was talking about it. It was probably somebody that you've had on your show, but just the turnaround that's happened in the last, 18 months, 2 years of the amount of games that Valve or Steam now supports on the Linux desktop is huge. And that's what happens when a company decides, there might actually be a technological benefit to running Linux as a base compared to Windows. And it's worth us pouring some time and R&D into making this thing work.
Yep. It's amazing to see because within a year, you go from having maybe single digits or double digits of Windows games playable to thousands with the advance of Proton and everything else. So absolutely amazing time that we are in.
And absolutely not knocking any of the work that's gone into that, because as people that have been around in that world, especially with the whole, Steam Proton situation, there's an awful lot of development and work that's gone into the background to allow that to happen at the time that it has. So I'm not naive to the fact that it's not like Valve just showed up to the party and went, haha, we can make it work now.
Right.
It's just that they kind of pushed the needle forward, did that last crucial thing to make it actually stick. For most people to be able to enjoy, and the momentum just seems really strong with it. So it's really, really great to see.
And we reap the benefits of it.
100%.
So, are you what would you consider yourself? Are you an open source enthusiast where everything you run has to be open source, or are you more on the pragmatic side where you use whatever tool's the best tool for the job, even if that would include proprietary software?
Yeah, definitely on the pragmatic side. Yeah, even though for me, most times the best tool for the job does land me in the open source, like free and open source software world. Yeah, definitely on the pragmatic side. I 100% appreciate, and I think more people appreciate what free software means. And I think in some ways, the value of what free software represents has maybe shifted a little bit in the last few years with regards to data privacy, with regards to transparency of companies, and all that kind of thing. So I feel like open source software, free and open source software, has gotten a lot more credibility just in terms of as a licensing platform than maybe it once did. At the same time, I don't have I don't have a deep seated hatred for big tech, at least the ones that were the traditional targets of Linux or free and open source software enthusiasts. So yeah, in fact, I would probably, in terms of my perception of big tech and companies that are usually at the forefront of people's use of technology, I would actually, like Google as a company has probably been behind at some point or other, probably a lot more free/open source projects in the past, but I'm more wary of them as a company than I am of, Apple and Microsoft. And I think it's fascinating, the pivot that Microsoft has made. I mean, it's more than a pivot. They've really turned a ship around in terms
Yes.
of where they were headed as a company, and that's a whole fascinating story that we can get into some other time. But their adoption of embracing open source software standards and open sourcing a bunch of their libraries and development frameworks and that kind of thing, I think is genuinely good. And so I've appreciated seeing that. So I think, yeah, for me personally, I think I can see the benefits, and I think most people can see the benefits a lot more visibly now for free and open source software compared to what it was maybe 10 years ago, where your enthusiasts were like, free and open source software, and you're like, but why? Like, what benefit does it bring? And they're like, well, because it's free. And you're like, well, okay. it wasn't a very compelling argument. Whereas now
Right.
I feel like free and open source software has a very compelling use case behind it, and a reason for even big tech to adopt those licensing frameworks for the benefits that they bring to their perception as a company, and the speed of development and all that kind of thing.
Yep. And one thing that those big companies don't have is the community behind them. So, and I won't say they don't have a community. They don't have a community that is willing to help people, willing to do the things the right way, in a way that promotes everybody and not just one person or one thing. And I think that, to me, is the biggest thing for Linux, because I always say that community is the best reason to run Linux. So, I mean, other people have other reasons, like, open source software is one of the biggest reasons, flexibility, customization. But what drives your passion or your love for Linux?
Yeah, look, I think look, you probably named up most of them already. I think for me, the ability for me to be able to control exactly what I need out of a system, to know that I can go digging into the system to actually see what exactly is going on. There's nothing that's off limits to me. And if I need to change something, chances are I can. Those are, at least on the most pragmatic level, that's what I enjoy about Linux. But definitely the amount of community support that you have is, I would say, the only reason that I've been able to stick with it or to make it work as well as I have for me. And it's probably not like my use case isn't crazy compared to what other people are managing to do with this platform. But yeah, the fact that you can, like, if you have an issue for something, chances are someone else on the internet has not only had that issue before, but they've solved it, and then they've actually taken the time to write up an article or post in a forum or create a YouTube video about it. And I think that's kind of special. And the fact that it's a bit of a hit and miss. Sometimes you can find those sorts of solutions for Windows and Mac, but there is. It's just, you can have the most bizarre issue. For me, like a visible example of that is that I was having some issues with fan speed control on a specific Dell laptop model. It was an XPS 9570. It's the one that I've got now, and yeah, it was just like a weird situation where the fan wasn't. The fan would be kicking up all the time, and it didn't need to be. And I was like, "What is going on with this?" And yeah, so chances are, and there was somebody out there who'd done like a super detailed write up about this particular issue, which distros were affected by it, and how to fix it. And he'd come up with like a script and a link to somebody else's work that they'd collaborated to kind of fix it up, and they'd gotten a hold of Dell to let them know what was going on, and it was bundled with firmware issues with that particular model. And anyway, long story short, that whole issue, I solved it for my particular use case, and then later distro releases, later Linux kernel releases, no worries with that particular issue out of the box anymore. But it's just a really good example of how people's passion for the projects that they're involved in, people's passion for running Linux means that they're usually more likely to go out there and try and do something that'll help other people in similar situation than people on Windows or Mac who will just kind of put up with an issue, or I don't know, expect someone to fix it for them somehow. I don't know.
Well, there was a Linus Tech Tips put out a tweet a while back saying, what are the reasons why, I forget exactly how he worded it. What are the reasons why
I saw that tweet?
Linux?
Yeah.
Yep. So I commented about it, and the community and the Linux community itself being one of the reasons why you would run Linux. And, even today, I just got a reply to that saying how the Linux community is terrible and they don't help you with any issues. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think you're in the same community as I am. Like, there are so many friendly outlets in the Linux community, whether that be the forums, the distro forums themselves, Telegram groups, YouTube videos. There are so many outlets where people are willing to help and go that extra mile to say, here, do this, do that. I mean, yeah, we've always had our issues as far as some people will be unfriendly. We used to get RTFM years ago and all this stuff. But all of that has been changing so much to the point where the community is the best thing about Linux, because there is so much value and put into it by people freely out of their own time. They're not getting paid, and they're willing to help you. I had a guy help me for hours with this one issue that I was going through. He didn't have to do that, but this is what the Linux community is made of, and it's getting better and better every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you do any coding or scripting at all, dude?
Not really. The closest I got was back in the days where you could create a custom OpenSUSE based OS, and I think it was tied in with the OpenSUSE build service back then, and so there was a few things, like barely scratching the surface with any of that side of things, but there was a few things that I learned to do through that. But that was probably back in 2011, 2012. Apart from that brief toe in the water, no. Like I gradually, as I've come across other people's work, and another example, coming back to this XPS laptop that I have. So JackHack96 is a person who's created basically a post-install script for the Ubuntu-based releases for this particular laptop. And it's basically just like a list of things that he has done to try and optimize Ubuntu, especially the LTS release, to that particular laptop model. Things like fan speed, power management, like all that kind of stuff, sound cards, and the list goes on. So when, for example, coming across that project, like I'll open up the script and I'll have a look at, what all's going on and get a bit of a sense of how these things work, but never don't actually do any like development, coding, anything like that. And so it's a whole nother world that one day maybe I might have time to get my head around. But at the same time, I'm also quite happy to stick with my naive perceptions about what is actually capable in computer science, and just sit here as your average Joe and just yammer on about what I call it how I see it with with desktop Linux.
Yes, but to me that is perfectly fine because everybody has something to offer. Everybody contributes to the community in a different way. You contribute to the community by your videos, by your conversations. So many people have been helped by your videos. That alone is, to me, just as good as scripting or coding or developing. Because without that, I mean, it's hand in hand. Without that, without the promotion of this development piece, this piece of software, it's not going to be used as much as it would be. So everybody contributes in their own way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
So maintaining software is not always easy, obviously. And you did many videos. So I know that you tried out tons of distributions. Well, just like that XPS problem with the fan speed, is there something that stands out in your mind that you had a problem that you solved, that you were like, yes, I did it?
Consistently, the biggest issue that I would come up against in Linux, and seriously only until this 19.10 release cycle and Fedora 30, I think, was power management on laptops. Because it seemed to me that it blew my mind that somehow Windows 10 as an operating system gets like, we can go back and forth about that, the quality of what's going on there. But it seems to have more demands that it will make of hardware. And yet you unplug that laptop from the wall and you take it out into the wild and you're wanting to get work done. Somehow it can manage to eke out more battery life out of a laptop than most Linux distros out of the box, and how they're configured. And at least that's been my experience with most of the hardware that I've run. I don't know. It could actually be that I should just get Linux native hardware. That's a whole different story. Anyway, so for me, and especially in my college days, one of the key reasons that I would dual boot is because I would, have a laptop that I'd be taking into class, and I'd be taking into tutorials and stuff like that, and I would need it to last a fair while. And so I knew that I could get easily, 5 to 6 hours of battery life on Windows. And I guess this was at the time where it was a big priority for Intel to make more power efficient chips. And then Windows was on board with that as well, with the whole Ultrabook, moniker. And they were wanting to make battery life of PCs better. And so it became a real struggle then to try and use Linux full time in these areas where I was, unplugged from the wall a lot of the time, because instead of 5 or 6 hours of battery, I would get 3 or 4. And so that was just a consistent pain point for me. So it was always about I would always love it when I would get to just the perfect amount of tweaking with, PowerTop and TLP and all kinds of other solutions that have come and gone through the years, to try and get the laptop performing in a way that didn't feel like it was, it didn't feel like I was limiting what the hardware was capable of doing, but it also gave me much better battery life than Linux would out of the box. And so thankfully nowadays, I can pretty confidently say, at least with the hardware that I've got now, again, which is why I don't have Windows on my hardware, is because I can get basically the same amount of battery life from from an operating system that I plop on there without having to tweak a whole lot at all. In fact, I think with this Ubuntu Mate distro that I've got running, 19.10, I don't think I even have TLP or PowerTop or any of those installed, and I'm still getting perfectly reasonable battery life. And that's probably testament to good work of the kernel and drivers and graphics drivers, and yeah, anyway. So, but anytime I can get decent battery life out of a Linux laptop, I'm a happy camper.
Yep. Yeah. Again, another reason why we are in such a great place, Linux. So, what would you say is the best source of information? Well, okay. What would you say that how you learn the best for problems, or even just, I want to learn this about something. I want to learn about power management. How do you learn the best? Is it forums? Is it wikis? Is it YouTube videos?
Yeah, probably a combination of all of the above, depending on the situation. If it's troubleshooting, usually wikis work best for me. So I usually find myself trawling through like the Arch Linux wiki, because there is just so much fantastic detail about like core, like right down at the base level of the Linux system, what is going on. And so that's been really insightful for dealing with all kinds of issues over the years, sound cards and networking, and even like virtual machine or like virtual what's it called, virtualization, like kernel modules and all those kinds of things. And so yeah, wikis are great for like specific troubleshooting. And I've used forums a little bit, but not too much. And if I'm wanting to just generally learn about something, and yeah, definitely YouTube videos is how I'm going to take that information in the best.
Right. So let's just say somebody walks up to you right now, and we just mentioned about people, contributing and whatnot. But what if somebody comes up to you right now and they want to say, I want to contribute to Linux in a meaningful way? What would you say to them? How would you direct them?
That's actually such a great question, because honestly, I've been starting to ask this of other people that are way more capable technologically than I am, and and I think a lot of it comes down to just applying your skill set, whatever your particular, whatever lane you kind of run in, to the project in some way. So, if you're somebody who's just into like visual design and aesthetics, then, maybe getting in and trying your hand at an icon pack, or, offering to help out with visual polish of things. Or if you're somebody who's, who is bilingual or trilingual, or, just has a really good grasp on a bunch of different languages. I know like open source projects are always looking for translations, and to effectively make that work. If your thing is communicating and helping people make decisions, or helping people find answers to things, then jump into forums of your favorite project, and maybe just decide that you're going to spend, I don't know, an hour a week just, cruising around and seeing how you might be able to solve or help contribute to solving people's problems, or just contributing to the conversation in general. If that's your style. I don't know. There's probably heaps of other things that people can do as well. And
those are some great suggestions, and they're suggestions that you don't have to be technical to do, that you can just jump in and start doing. So, yeah. So, what do you think of when I or somebody else around you use the term the year of the Linux desktop?
Really? Question mark? Is it? Wow. Oh man. No, it's I love like that's been a part of my vernacular, I guess, ever since I started this whole thing. And because it is, it's like that thing that's always on the horizon. And I think it will probably be there for forever because I think our perception of what desktop computing is continues to shift and will continue to shift. And I think that, yeah, what most people are wanting to do with computers and their idea of what a computer is rapidly changing. And so, in terms of desktop computers, power users, workstations, all those people that we talked about before, yeah, I think Linux is definitely going to become a lot more prolific in that space and probably a lot more synonymous with workstations and high-end productivity and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think the year of the Linux desktop is both here already and not yet. So
this is true.
We can just live in that blissful paradox.
Yep. So if you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
Yeah, what you said before about marketing is huge. The projects that I definitely gravitate towards are the ones that seem to have a really good grasp on communicating themselves and marketing themselves to the outside world. And for example, the Zorin project, I've talked about them before, but man, I love their website. Their website just looks sick. Like, it's just every time I open up their website, I'm like, man, I'm gonna go and install Zorin on something just to get that feeling. And I mean, Elementary looks great as well. I mean, I've already mentioned all the ones that I really appreciate, but yeah, I think there's just something so inviting about good marketing. And so, if you can effectively communicate to people what are the benefits of running something and be able to do that without scaring them off with, like a really outdated look on your website or some very techie language or all the things that nerds appreciate, which is where we kind of come to that, that divide where people don't necessarily see the value in different projects because of the fact they don't address all of these super techie things in the way that they present themselves. Yeah, I think any project that makes an effort to communicate the value of what they're doing in language that the everyday person that wants to try something out would understand, that's a good thing. And so, more of that, please.
Yes, absolutely. So thinking back on all of the reasons that you chose to run Linux when you first decided, hey, I'm going to run Linux, do those reasons still apply today?
For me, yes. Like, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing in terms of producing the things that I do and making videos and that kind of thing. I wouldn't be able to do those things if it weren't for the journey of discovery that I went on in Linux in the first place. And I do sometimes ask myself, like, would I still be running Linux if if this whole project, if the whole Infinitely Galactic channel and project never existed, would I still be kind of running it and into it? And I think in some level, yes, I would be. And it would, of course, depend on what I was doing for a job and what I had to fit in with professionally and what I had to be able to integrate with. But I think in my own sort of personal space, I'd absolutely still be running it because just the freedom, the ability to tinker with what you want to do, try different things, learn new stuff. It's all just so much more accessible than the sort of the very well-defined parameters that Mac OS and Windows present you with. So.
So is there anything you can let us in on as far as the future of your channel?
Yeah. Oh, look, it's going to be interesting. So the up to this point in time, and I did take a hiatus there for a couple of years while I was back in uni again and getting my teaching qualification and I was working as well, and I was newly married, and there was just a lot of stuff going on in life in general. So I thought there's sort of make this channel just limp along between now and then. So I'm going to take a break and just do life without doing that for a while. And then so then after that kind of wrapped up and I wasn't studying anymore, time opened up a bit more. I got back into it, and but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. In that I'll be, instead of sort of juggling two part-time roles, where my family and I we're going to be moving and relocating, and I'll be doing a full-time teaching role. So it'll be interesting to see how much time I have available to me. So right now I've got a fair bit of time, and I've been dedicating a fair bit of time towards this project and sort of polishing things up a little bit. And there's still some work that, like I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm working on sort of rebrand, and I'm working on a website, and exploring different possibilities there. But all that being said, I think the Infinitely Galactic project as it stands won't be changing fundamentally, and I'm going to keep chipping away at it. But it will be interesting to see what happens in 2020 to how much time I can actually contribute to this thing. I'm hoping that I'll still be able to plug away at one, maybe two videos in a fortnight, and we'll just see how it goes.
Nice. So how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, probably the most effective way is on Twitter @ingalactic. I've got an email on my YouTube page that is mostly for business inquiries, and obviously, and I don't know, you can probably relate to this as well. You get all kinds of weird requests and stuff from all corners of the globe. So that's always interesting. But definitely, if you want to connect with me or ask me a question or comment on stuff, usually Twitter's the best place to do it. I do kind of keep. I do try to keep an eye on YouTube comments and that kind of thing, and I'll occasionally jump in there and heart a few comments or that kind of thing. But I'm definitely not nearly as active on social media in general, like commenting and liking and even on Twitter retweeting and just jumping in on conversations as others. But I do try to stay abreast of what's going on. So if there is something that really catches my eye and I jump in and interact with, then I'll do that. But Twitter's probably the most straightforward.
Awesome, very awesome. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Blaine, for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fantastic. I really appreciate what you're doing, and the community that you foster through this and the live show as well.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux.